Good evening and welcome to Embry-Riddle to the Gail Lemron Auditorium for tonight's Speaker Series event, Lift Off the Page, an interactive discussion. The magazine now out. You can see it online too at liftoffthepage.com. Tonight, the business of aviation and more. We have a panel of 4 that we're going to introduce to you, and then we're going to also take questions from the audience. So in this discussion that will be 75 to 90 minutes, here we go. I want to introduce the panel. As you can follow the pictures, they're placed carefully under their own picture. Edward Onwe is the Chief Operating Officer at VT San Antonio Aerospace. Also on our panel tonight is Sherry Ortiz. She's the Senior Vice President at U.S. Aircraft Insurance Group. Damon J. D'Agostino is the President and CEO at Zephyrus Aviation Capital. And rounding out our panel tonight is Stephen M. Powell. He is the Chief Operating Officer at Synensys, all joining us tonight for our panel discussion on the business of aviation and more. Okay. We're going to do things a little bit differently than we had planned. We may be joined at some point by our YouTube audience, but I want to go right to this. As many know here at Embry-Riddle, Dr. Barry Butler, who could not be with us for this event tonight, there's another event across campus, has had a great idea about the importance of analytics and an Institute for Aviation Data Science and Business Analytics, which will produce graduates and leaders who can extract value from aviation's big data. As a center for new curriculum development and industry-focused applied research, the Institute will develop programs that give students that needed experience with statistical analysis. Successfully creating an Institute for Aviation Data Science and Business Analytics Institute will entail attracting and recruiting internationally recognized faculty, leading executives of data, science companies, and top graduate and undergraduate students. With all that having been said, analytics is going to play a large role in all of your work. Let's begin with Edward. How will analytics in the future help determine airline mechanics and safety?
So most airlines, also almost every airline out there, wants to have some sense of assurance of when the components on airplanes will fail. If you can predict how many flight cycles it's going to take for a component to fail, or if you can predict how long it's going to take for you to keep on flying the plane without necessarily having the need to inspect a certain section of the plane or a certain zone of the aircraft, that certainly would go a long way. So the ability to leverage data, and of course every airline out there, every maintenance facility has data. You can harvest that data and draw some intelligence out of it and allow you to predict your business. Talk about safety. Every airline out there, every maintenance facility also has controls in place and systems to ensure that employees who are involved in maintenance do not get injured. Okay, you also want to make sure that in the course of performing our maintenance, the airplane itself doesn't get damaged. So if you can leverage all the data that has been collected on the frequency of when damages could happen on the aircraft because employees are thinking about summer vacation versus focusing on work, or if you can leverage the types of conditions that could precipitate to an incident, I think could definitely go a long way in ensuring that the work environment is safer. Lastly, economics. Okay, every maintenance facility wants to predict how long it's going to take a mechanic to change a tire, right? And so because there's human involvement, the data sets vary. There's a lot of randomness associated with how quickly one mechanic does it over the other one. So to be able to collect all that data and draw a baseline expectation to say, if I train the mechanic or I train the inspector, I can get an assurance of how long it's going to take him or her to get the work done, and I can use that to predict my cost. I can also use that to define how profitable the organization would be. That certainly will be a game changer.
How long do you think it will be before the industry will rely almost totally on analytics when it comes to staffing for new facilities?
I can tell you that we are not far away from that because most repair facilities leverage data that has been collected over time. But of course, as software, computing power, and our ability to create software applications that can make sense out of the data that has been collected, as the advent of technology continues to improve, I think that it'll go a long way in creating the leapfrog that we need from where we are today to where we want to be.
I should say this for our audience here that may be watching and listening, that all these people are from Embry-Riddle. They've all graduated. They all went into different fields of aviation. They are the fruits of what the university offers to the world. As the leaders, as the Harvard of the skies, each one of these people brings a unique talent. And later I'm going to ask them a question that they were asked at lunch today, which, did the career pick you? Or did you pick that part of your career? But let's bring Sherry Ortiz into the discussion. How will analytics, you have a fascinating, I mean, all of you have fascinating stories. I was really intrigued when we had our pre-interview and I found out just how many lawsuits happen for things that are other than mishaps. I mean, like crazy stuff. How will analytics play into what you do?
Well, we've seen an uptick in our plaintiffs' attorneys who are savvy to data that's already collected. So I think generally being careful with de-aggregated data is extremely important. FOCA data, for one, even data on mishaps on the runway or the ground or part viability, those are all issues that can come back later and be the source, right, a source that's ripe for litigation. In almost every circumstance where plaintiffs are looking for that type of data as much as we are looking for that type of data in keeping aircraft safe and maintenance operations safe.
I'm thinking that the analytics could help decide what resources need to be applied to the areas where there may be weakness and vulnerability. Would that be fair to say?
I think it goes both ways. So with my insurance hat, to say that you're keeping an organization or an FBO or a maintenance shop incredibly safe by monitoring different variables, that's wonderful. But at the same time, if you see a weakness, that weakness can then be exploited later in litigation. So I see it from both sides all the time.
Damon, like the others, a graduate from here, and you get into the area of the financial end for the industries. And I learned in my pre-conversation with you, everybody else knew this, but I found out last, that 50% of the aircraft with the majors are now in a lease situation?
Yeah, that's right. And I wouldn't say the majors, but I would say just airlines globally, airlines worldwide. About half of their fleet of airplanes that they operate are leased.
How will analytics play into what you do?
Oh, in a lot of different areas. I would say if I just take our company as an example, on being a lessor, being an owner of the asset who relies on the economics of the asset through its economic useful life, we want to predict a lot of things. We want to predict future values, not just at the end of its economic life, but we want to try to track it throughout the cycle of the asset. We want to predict cash flows that'll come in, so we want to be thinking about future revenue streams of rent. We want to be thinking about supply and demand because of that. So we want to be thinking about the factors that go into really influencing the demand of aircraft, and then how that's going to translate into the economics going forward, because they're very closely correlated. And then we also finally would be thinking about the maintenance, so similar to the predictability of the maintenance, because that's going to help you understand the cash flows from the maintenance side of operating an aircraft.
Is it's difficult in dealing outside the country with interest airlines as they want to go through their financing, or is it easier? Are the rules different outside the country as opposed to inside the country?
I wouldn't actually say that it's different. I wouldn't say that it's easier or harder. I would just say it's different. So I've had experience leasing airplanes probably to 60, 70 different countries around the world. Every country's got their nuances. Some are maybe slightly easier than others. But that makes it, I guess, kind of part of fun, part of interesting, part of the business.
Now, I got a guess from memory here. They're all pilots except you, Damon?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Are you going to become a pilot?
Maybe one day.
Okay. You want to become a pilot?
If Embry-Riddle makes me a good deal, I'll
there you go.
some flight training.
All right. Here's Stephen, and very interesting because with your affiliation with Delta, you fly twice a month, I think you told us, right? But let's talk about the principal part of your work and how analytics could play into that in the future.
So I think from the aviation side, I think some of the analytics, especially around operational efficiency, is also into play. Like I think when originally when kind of on-time performance came to be a metric from DOT, the idea was there was pushback from the airlines around that metric, and now I think everybody's embraced that. It can be a competitive advantage to be on time. People expect us to be on time when you travel. Your high-value customers expect that. So I think that the airlines are able to use data now like latency data, which is how long it takes you to taxi out from pushback all the way to the runway. So each minute, means hundreds of pounds of gas, which cumulatively with big data, you're looking at thousands of operations a day. Over a 365 kind of period, you're talking about every minute matters. And so how can the pilot more efficiently and the crew that pushes the aircraft back, maintenance and everyone else efficiently make that operation successful? So having access to that kind of information is really important even to the cockpit to understand how to operate more efficiently. I think from the medical side of our work, there's no doubt that big data will play big roles in population health. So it's like taking the population of a city like Daytona Beach and understanding how patients are going to need healthcare services in the future by age, by risk factors, by past medical histories. So being able to access data that comes from your electronic health record and be able to use that analytically to be able to derive new services or reduce services you don't really need and do more services that that the population is going to anticipate. More preventive rather than reactive services.
You could almost do a carve out on healthcare here. And I'm just going to leap to a question based on the discussion we've all had. Healthcare on a plane, if someone's having a baby or somebody has an ambulance, do you just go to the closest airport that has a hospital? Do you go to your destination? How does that work?
Well, Sherry knows. We do what the lawyers tell us to do. No. Absolutely. Your first duty is to the safety of the aircraft and the passengers on that aircraft. So again, it's probably similar to a triage kind of event, say in a mass casualty. You have to figure out who's your, not only who your sickest, patient is, but in this case, your passenger. You have to think about the whole aircraft, not just that one person. So you want to safely navigate the aircraft towards a suitable medical facility because you generally have some support from potentially medical professionals on the aircraft, which are those good Samaritans that come forward. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of medical equipment for them to use on an aircraft. So there's some limitations to that. It's probably best to get towards a healthcare provider. What's great is most commercial, at least from my knowledge, especially my experience at Delta, is that we have a contracted medical service that's just a sat phone call away, no matter where you are in the world, that can give you first-hand and first-rate medical advice on what to do based on the passenger's conditions.
I'm getting the eye from Sherry over here because, no, you know why? Because I'm going to ask you the question. Last week, there was a story of a woman who left her child behind at the airport. The plane in air turned around and came back and picked up the child. Now, it was a foreign country airline, but still, if you do that, do you get sued as an airline?
Well, I probably shouldn't say, but you're always going to get sued, in my opinion, if it's something that's newsworthy. So that's a given most often. So yes, I think you might.
Because you did say that if a flight is delayed or you miss your flight or it was overbooked and the airline gives you a ticket for, say, a flight anytime the next year, you're still going to get sued.
Don't say the O word because that doesn't really happen anymore. But
overbooked doesn't happen anymore?
We're not really doing
How about
that.
flight crew not showing up?
Well, I've never heard of that happening ever. Timing out, maybe, but yes, we get sued. Internationally, it's a bit of a different game because it's a different law that is applicable. But yes, so when we were talking earlier about in-flight emergencies, it's an incredibly difficult area to traverse. And if you use an organization like StatMD, essentially the pilot or a flight attendant, usually a flight attendant, calls StatMD and asks for a doctor who's on staff to give them advice. And again, there's very limited medical equipment on board the aircraft, and in the enhanced medical kits, only a doctor can crack those open anyway. And they don't really contain that much equipment in them. So I think it's unfortunate that I think people see the crew also now as doctors and also keeping them safe. But I think you made an excellent point when you said that the rest of the flight, all of the passengers, are your concern as well. And that's really important to think about when people expect you to divert to like a local grass strip airport, as we just said, in a 777. Or something, and they say, well, you could have landed, you could have done this. And almost every time, I would say with certainty, pilots are looking to get down as quickly as they can to help the person who's in distress.
You said something, Edward, that was very interesting, that we're all human in the end. And when we're doing maintenance, it's a very lucrative field. I don't know how many in our audience know this, but you can make a really good living. And we've done 2 programs on the pilot shortage. Now, a step into the mechanic shortage. If I've got the numbers right, between the age of 48 and 53 is where most of our airline maintenance and mechanics are.
That's correct.
Inside of 10 years, a lot are going to retire. So we're going to have a shortage. Would it be, in your opinion, Ed, equivalent to what we talk about today with a pilot shortage in terms of numbers?
Absolutely. I think that, in the maintenance world, that conversation is already happening. We do realize, like I said earlier on when we had our conversation, that the average age of the aviation aviation maintenance worker is between 49 and 53 years old. So if you do the math, 10 years from now, where will all those workers be? Okay, they've given their time to the aviation maintenance world, and they will be retiring. So we have a duty, to ensure that there is a workforce that will fill the void that will be created by those workers when that happens. So there's increased focus, from the FAA and from the airlines and from, MROs to create workforce development programs that would create awareness of the possibilities that avail itself in aviation maintenance. You can have an exciting career that evolves on a day-to-day basis. It's an exciting world, it's an exciting opportunity, and of course the demand for aviation maintenance will always be there. We can try to innovate and try everything we can to automate the process, but at the end of the day, you're still going to rely on a human, to be able to inspect and repair and follow instructions and make sure that the aircraft is safe to operate.
And the salary range that you described to me, would you share with the audience what you can make as a maintenance worker / mechanic?
Absolutely. Maintenance workers make 6-figure salaries. You have maintenance workers who make $52 an hour. So if you do the math, you know that maintenance workers could end up to $190,000 a year. On an average. So there isn't a lot of knowledge about that, and so just want to use this opportunity and use this platform to encourage those who may not be aware of the opportunities there. And of course, besides just the mechanic, there is a wide array of support staff that are involved in the aircraft maintenance business. You have liaison engineers, you have planners, you have quality control inspectors, you have quality assurance specialists, you have quality engineers, who ensure that the infrastructure and the system supporting that maintenance can provide the assurance that gives everyone the comfort level that when that airplane rolls out of the hangar facility, that it's going to be an airplane that will be expected to perform at the same level at which it was delivered from the OEM.
And you said and underscored that absolutely must be in compliance, no deviation when it comes to maintenance.
100% compliance, no other options. When you buy a flight ticket, you're not thinking about, well, am I going to get to where I'm planning to go to today? Or am I going to, should I be worried about, who performed the maintenance on the aircraft? You buy your ticket with the assurance that we in the aviation maintenance world will not compromise on that promise. That airplane will always be safe. Wherever the maintenance is done, that assurance is always there. And so we have gotten to a point, where aviation flight actually is are safer than road transportation. If you think about the complexity of the aircraft and all the systems that have to work together to ensure that at any point in time you can count on that aircraft functioning right, you realize that a whole lot of work has been done in the area of aviation maintenance and reliability.
Just out of curiosity, before I go to Damon, have you ever had one of your crew, one of your people say, a certain aircraft just coming in, oh man, I don't want to work on that one. Somebody else can handle this? Does that ever happen?
Well, that happens a lot. The reality about it is when an engineer is designing an airplane and he gets to a point where he feels like, well, the design is complete, and all of a sudden there's an afterthought. Well, I didn't think about this, so I'm just going to stock this. I'm just going to push this component, and push it in a little cabinet there, never thinking about the guy who eventually will have to go into that cabinet and go get that component and take care of it. So yeah, some airplanes are generally hard to work on, but at the end of the day, there's always clear instructions that allow people to be able to perform maintenance and do complex repairs on this aircraft with the same level of quality or airworthiness that the aircraft got delivered from the factory.
In the business of aviation, some of our audience is wondering aloud, who's the person who measures the seats to decide how small this is? I mean, you all must hear that.
Ask this guy.
Yeah, I was going to say, Damon, as you try to maximize in capitalization, I'm going to ask you about creativity.
Yeah.
But first, how does that factor in? Because a lot of disgruntled people, particularly in this country, are saying, I know I put on weight, but man, I'm not that big. And there's like less room. Do they actually use analytics and say, we can squeeze in an extra 3 seats if we squeeze out this? Does that happen?
Very much so. I think if you look at the newest technology airplanes, and in particular the narrow bodies, Airbus and Boeing, Embraer and Bombardier, they spend a lot of time, on just this. And if you've been in some of the new generation airplanes lately, including the restrooms, you realize just how, small they're trying to make every square inch of that airplane so they can get more seats in. Of course, there's a limit to how many seats you can get in. That's mandated by the airworthiness authorities and in terms of exit limits and how long it takes passengers to get out in the event of an emergency. But airlines will try to put as many seats on there as possible. And frankly, the same people who would complain, and I'm one of them, that the seat's just, too small and I don't have enough leg room and this and that, are the same passengers who want the cheapest possible fares. 100%. And the way to get the cheapest possible fares is to put as many people as possible in those airplanes and operate those airplanes as much as possible.
Does the federal government speak to the issue of space for storage, for seating, or do they not? They leave that up to the private sector to decide what works best by the numbers.
Yeah, it comes down to, as I said before, the exit limit. And so you have to have, and essentially that right now is 28 inches of what we call seat pitch from the back of the seat to the front of the seat, from the front of the back of your seat to the back of the seat in front of you. You can get down as low as 28-inch seat pitch. That's 28 inches isn't really accepted in the United States. But internationally, you would find that quite frequently. So there's a limit to just how finite you can actually make that. And you've probably seen there's been different stories, especially coming out of like the Interiors Conference in Hamburg that just ended a couple of weeks ago. People are always flirting with the standing seat concept or different things to try to squeeze more people in. And so not out of the realm of possibility.
Wow, I saw Australia had that as a test where they were having people stand. I'm like, they're not cattle. I wasn't sure where that was going to go. You talked to me about creativity in the finance world. What keeps your firm competitive with the others that are out there? They're going to capitalize flights and companies. You told me we have to be creative.
Yeah.
Give us an example of what creative is.
Yeah, so in my business, there's probably about 150 different companies like ours. And that may sound like a lot, it may not sound like a lot, depending on what your perspective is. But keep in mind, there's a finite number of airlines. So we have a finite number of customers that a relatively large number of companies are competing for the business. And so for us and companies like us, we have to constantly be thinking, how can we be better in terms of the way that we provide a service to our customer, How can we deliver something that, they might need maybe just a little bit better than the competitor to the right or the competitor to the left? So creativity for us comes into play in a lot of different ways. It comes into play in the types of products that you can offer. It comes into play in the type of relationship that you have with your customer, and it might sound, somewhat contrite, but you'd be surprised how a relationship can really kind of carry the day against your competitors. And what does that really mean? That means that you're understanding your customer's needs, that you're understanding their business, and you're trying to craft a solution for them that's maybe just a little bit better, a little bit more unique. And a lot of that just comes from listening and hearing what they need and trying to go just that little bit extra.
Stephen, do you think that there will be fewer airlines in the next 10 years simply because of economics?
Well, we might see that internationally. I think there's probably some room for some more consolidation. I think domestically we've kind of gone through the big consolidation moves with most of the major airlines. We might see, a couple of others join up, but I think you kind of met some critical mass at this point. So again, I'm not sure how much more advantage there is for airlines to scale larger. They may have already got the economy of scale out of what they've done so far domestically. What happens internationally, I think there's still probably some room for that to occur in places like India, I think would be one of those places. Maybe potentially in emerging countries like Africa as well.
Okay, this is a jump ball question, so anybody can answer it. I've heard that American and Southwest, of the many airlines out there, have two of the shrewdest purchasing contracts for fuel, which has kept them financially healthy. Is that true? I'm not in the aviation business, but I've been told from the outside that. Are any of the airlines in a more, let me repackage the question, better position to buy their fuel for the next few years? Nobody?
I can tell you, I mean, you probably answer some of that. I'll jump on this from, what's reported from that perspective.
Yeah, I wouldn't focus just solely on fuel. I think the two airlines that you mentioned are very good. They're very efficient. They're very experienced, right? So it's not just fuel, it's their fleet. It's everything right down to the seat back brochures and everything else. And I think that comes from experience. That comes from, we probably have, in the United States in particular, we probably have the most seasoned, experienced management teams running airlines right now. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of lessons that have been learned over the years, and a lot of mistakes that aren't being repeated that you would have seen previously. So I'm sure fuel is one example, but I would say it probably cuts across the entire spectrum.
I think also I think you go back to the economy of scale kind of model, is that as you're buying more, any of us, as we buy more from a vendor, there's an opportunity for discounting, right? So there's opportunity for best pricing for, once you get to that kind of level of scale as well.
I've been thinking all day about how I was going to ask this question, and 5 people have already asked me before I came in. You're going to ask them about the 737s and Boeing? It's a delicate subject. I'll ask the question from this standpoint first. When you heard the news, and unfortunately this terrible tragedy, and Boeing, and the questions as the days progressed on the 737, what went through your mind, beginning with you, Edward?
I felt like it was an unfortunate occurrence because, Boeing has an excellent track record. I mean, the platforms it has produced to our industry are remarkably safe. So, of course, when that occurrence came to light, of course, I felt bad about it. But I have the assurance, of course, that Boeing will always find its way out of the crisis that it's currently in because it has a remarkable commitment to safety and excellence.
Again, I'll be very careful with the question because I don't want to put any of you in the position where there'd be a lot of conjecture, but your thoughts. Sherry, you've dealt with a lot of litigation and legal matters. What were your thoughts when you heard the story?
I think initially I was really, to hear of any accident, it's awful, especially if you're dealing with litigation because your mind goes to what's going to happen next. But I think Boeing really made an incredible step and an appropriate response. I can't comment on much more than that because there is active litigation on some of this. But
are they a client, for the record?
They're always a co-defendant is a better way to say it.
Okay. In other words, you've represented them or their personnel in the past.
We work together on almost every crash
Okay.
or non-crash, where we have a litigation.
To stay with you for a moment, you worked for the FAA at one point.
I did.
How long?
For 3 years.
Why did you leave?
I like to be on the other side of the V. You know, I prefer to do defense work. I love aviation very, very much. And I think that it's more productive for me to do things to promote aviation and to be positive. I mean, there's more money in the plaintiff side, in fairness to anybody who wants to be doing this. But, you know, this side of it, I felt better about doing it. I was doing enforcement actions, which isn't super fun when you're a pilot.
Damon, your thoughts when you first heard about the tragedy?
Yeah, I mean, like any aviation accident, I think the human in you know, immediately goes to what those last moments and seconds must have been like for the people on the plane. And then as someone who travels a lot, you know, you sort of, for a split second, at least I do, I put myself in that same position. And then I think, you know, the professional in me starts to immediately think what, you know, exactly what we've just heard is that, you know, Boeing is an unbelievable corporation. GE, CFM, who power that airplane, unbelievable corporation. They will figure this out with the accident investigators. They'll get to the bottom of it and they will make it right and get it corrected.
To stay with you for a moment, in your field where you're dealing with finance, when a tragedy like this happens, does it stop everything while everybody catches their breath, or do you proceed with your arrangements, deals, creativity, what have you?
Yeah, you can't stop because you don't know what the cause is, and so obviously the airplane today, the Boeing MAX airplane, is grounded. But there's airlines. There's 400 and something of these airplanes, and if you just use the math that I said before, you know, let's say roughly 200 of those are leased. Those airlines are still paying lease payments on those aircraft. They're still paying their debt payments if they borrowed against it. You know, so that aspect is still going on for the owners of the aircraft, the lessors. Maybe things slow down a little bit. You probably don't have a lot of airlines knocking on your door saying, "Hey, I'd like to lease a MAX airplane in 2 or 3 years," because people want to understand what the issue is behind it. So that small aspect of it, you know, probably slows down a little bit. But at the same time, passengers still have to get from point A to point B. So now the discussion kind of shifts to say, okay, well, while the MAX airplane isn't flying in this case, you know, how am I going to get my passengers from point A to point B if I'm an airline, and who's going to help me provide capacity to be able to do that? So it's more like a shift than a slowdown.
Steve, question comes to you. Reaction upon hearing of the tragedy.
I think it goes from the human factor side of this. It always comes back to, you know, our model, or do we immediately go to this is pilot error? You know, so our you know, your first thinking is, what did the pilots do wrong in this case? And I think the human factors field really gets people to start to think about more of, you know, that there's a systemic, you know, problem here, that it wouldn't just be a pilot input potentially that could be the cause of the accident. And any investigation, you have to look at many, many other factors other than just what the pilots did or didn't do in the case of an emergency or an event like this. Tragic though they are, the idea is again, like everyone's talking about, like, you know, take time to really be thorough with the root cause of the issues at hand, and then deal with those one by one.
For the audience that may not know, Embry-Riddle is renowned for its human factors programs. Many people come here for that purpose. You were one of them, Steve. You were always attracted by the human factors element. Can you go with that for a moment?
Well, it's, you know, even saying pilot error is a misnomer. You know, it's really human error. You know, the idea is that we all make mistakes, not just pilots, right? And so whether it's maintenance or anyone in the safety chain, if you will, or safety purview, can make an accident. And we're just not always, we kind of think about ourselves being 100% every day that we go to work, go to do our job. No one intends to purposely cause an accident or an incident or safety concern. But we're human, we're fallible, we make mistakes. And the idea is that, you know, what so drew me into human factors was that inevitability of human error. And the fact that just because you make a mistake, that you can't recover from that mistake. That's the key. How do you manage once an error has been made? And how do you keep that error from becoming a situation that can't be controlled or beyond your control?
I'm curious because, as mentioned, we've done a couple of programs on the pilot shortage, and I'm wondering, knowing we have that out there, how does it affect that? It's a big issue. How does it affect each of you in terms of what you do, beginning with you, Edward? We have a pilot shortage, but does that then reflect on fewer vessels that are able to be in the air, and then it affects the maintenance schedule? Does it affect you in your world?
No, I mean, I think the quest for humans to travel to new places and, see places they haven't seen will always be there, okay? And of course, the easiest way to achieve that will be the airplane. Although we have a shortage of mechanics or maintenance personnel, so to speak, there's always, the reality that aviation must continue. So there are several measures that are taken to mitigate that. You have to find ways to minimize errors. You have to find ways to be more efficient. You have to find ways to ensure that, maintenance tasks are done correctly the first time. You have to make sure that the entire system to support that will allow maintenance to be done in the most expeditious way, in the safest manner. And so once you leverage all those systems, and of course you consider that human factors will always be in play, and you put in place a safety management system to mitigate the impact of that, it allows you to still cope with the increase in demand for maintenance personnel, because you now have found a way to mitigate the impact of that.
Sherry, does the pilot shortage affect the legal areas that you work in?
I want to be careful here, but the only way that I would say that it would be if they sort of reduced hours necessary to pilot aircraft, which I think they will never do again.
Because they kicked it up, within the last 10 years?
Right. So I believe that solved the problem. I think for me, airlines are always going to get the cream of the crop, and they'll always have the pilots they need to move forward. I think for me, I won't see litigation surrounding that. I'll see themes of that surrounding litigation, sort of like the seat size arguments or the idea that you have to rush to be on time. Those are themes in litigation that sort of appear over and over again, but they don't have a lot of root in the ground.
I used to hear that I think 2 or 3 out of every 10 pilots are Embry-Riddle graduates. Is that correct? Would that be correct, Dr. Williams? I think it's like 2 or 3. Anybody? Alan? Pretty close, okay. Pilot shortage, does it affect any of your decision-making or what Zephyr does when they're considering long-range planning?
Yeah, look, I think it impacts the entire industry. So I wouldn't just focus on, my business or my industry or, Sherry's or Edward's. I would say it goes across the entire spectrum, right? Because so if you're an airline and there's fewer pilots, that means you're competing for a smaller workforce. How do you attract a pilot to, Delta or American or, any of the other airlines? A lot of times it comes down to having to pay them more or provide a better working environment. And so what does that mean? That means it increases the cost of your operation. And when it increases the cost of your operation, then that has a knock-on effect that goes throughout. So I think it actually impacts throughout. And then when you think, okay, that's in the immediacy, well, what's going to happen, fast forward 15, 20, 30 years? What it's causing is that the manufacturers of the airplanes are now starting to think about technology to, reduce the number of pilots that'll be needed. And we'd all sit here and say, never, not in my lifetime. But I know, when I first started flying on commercial airplanes, there was 3 pilots in a cockpit. Mm-hmm. It's not unreasonable to think there'll be a safety pilot and somebody flying a drone somewhere else in my lifetime. And I think, that's the type of innovation that manufacturers are going to have to do to keep pace for their customers, the airlines.
Okay. Yeah. Steve, same question.
I think where it's happening is downstream. Like you said, not so much at the major level. I work with the military, and they are losing a lot of pilots to commercial aviation. So, and the same would probably be true in corporate and others, where again you'll increase turnover. So there could be an opportunity there for the need for what does that do to your safety margin, if you will. So you're either going to ask your pilots to work potentially longer hours So there could be a fatigue issue that would I'm thinking about from the human factor side. So there could be some extra fatigue, some stress that's going to be placed on those pilots that remain. But I could see that it's kind of a, what do we call it, the unintended consequences of the system effect, how it impacts the entire profession, if you will.
We want to bring up students to ask their questions. 2 microphones are set at the end of each aisle. If you want to ask any of these panelists a question, if you make it to the point, please come up right now. We'll interweave your questions in. I take it we don't have questions from across the country, or do we? Okay, all right. So we're going to work with just this audience. Anytime, just step right up and we'll introduce you. If you would, tell us your first name, your field of study, your year of study, so we can get you on the record, because this is a live event. I want to ask about drones and birds. I know you get hit with this, you get asked about it, how it affects you. We've had some incidents. You cannot anticipate everything. We know that. So let me take it from right to left this time and begin with you, Steve, and ask, because you fly, so have you ever had to deal with this?
Absolutely. I think like any birds, drones, drones being kind of a newer, what we would call in the human factor side, a new threat, right? So pilots are always looking at things such as this as threats, and how will you manage that threat? So that's probably the biggest question is, do you know, number one, is there sort of advisory from like a NOTAM or from the tower or someone in the approach corridor or another airplane that would actually report that they have a drone sighting, that a drone is nearby, a drone has been spotted. So again, that awareness factor, if you're operating the aircraft, to know that there's a potential that there's possibly a drone out there is number one. Again, I think from an avoidance perspective, again, there's a whole idea that this is probably going to happen somewhere in the takeoff and approach continuum, and that's a very risky part of the flight. So again, very, very big risk, as are birds. They always have been. Again, some way or another, we've been able to coexist with them. I would imagine as we think about drones in the future, like any new technology or new threat out there, we're going to try to find ways to better coexist. And I think some of the regulations that are coming in, and as we get more involved in that, to know from those that operate drones to those that are flying up in the air with the drones of how to operate safely with them, coexist.
Damon, this might come to you again through analytics. I'm thinking incidents that involve either birds or drones or could be in midair. Does that factor into all of your work as well? If you're dealing with an individual airline or investor or anything, do you think about those things?
Not really. I don't think that, at least in the way that we think about the business, I don't know that there's any difference between a bird, a drone, or anything else externally that could impact kind of the life cycle of an airplane or the economics of it from a financier's perspective.
Well, Sherry, I know you could probably take an hour to talk about this. How often is the issue coming up from a legal standpoint, at least to your knowledge? Whether birds of prey interfere with an airplane, or whether the threat of a drone interfering with the entering of an airspace?
Honestly, I haven't seen the drone issue as much in any litigation. That's definitely like an enforcement type action, and I think the FAA is doing the best that it can with sort of a new technology and developing regulations around it, especially licensing it. I think that's a great move. I see drones and just to put on my insurance hat, so from an insurance perspective, to anticipate the types of losses that would occur as a result of a drone use, I couldn't have expected it. That a drone be used for ag purposes, and that a drone is monitoring fields and production. And let's say a drone crashes and burns down, hundreds of acres of crops. Okay. Would they be adequately insured for that? Those are the types of things that were new to me coming into this, because I assumed it was just some kid outside with a drone, trying to fly it on his free time, and there's really a really big commercial market for it. So I think you're right. I think that there has to be a way for the two to coexist, and I think one will catch up with the other. So.
Okay. Forgive me for doing this. In light of the rain that is hitting the roof, can everybody hear everything here, or does it need to be a little louder? Okay. Sherry's microphone is too low.
Might be
Okay.
my voice that's too low too.
You get the big question because all of your guys and ladies, and by the way, is this still a male-driven occupation? The mechanics and the engineering of planes and the maintenance, is it largely dominated by men, or are women having opportunities as well?
I think that it's still a male-dominated industry, but of course we've seen a large influx of females into it, and of course we encourage it because I can tell you that some of the best engineers I've known, or the best technicians that I've come across have been females. They have a sense of patience. They're able to meticulously, dissect issues, problems as they arise on the aircraft, whereas sometimes a male can get a little bit impatient. So from that standpoint, we want to encourage all the females out there to, get into the field and contribute to, the history we're making with aviation.
Out of curiosity, because there's a shortage, is the private sector offering scholarship opportunities for men and women to get their education so that we can grow the workforce?
I think that, there are several airlines, of course, several MROs that have come up with incentive programs out there, including scholarships to encourage young teenagers and, young adults to get into the field. But I think that certainly more can be done. We certainly don't want to get to a point in time where it becomes a national crisis where the federal government has to step in. But I do believe that there's opportunity to improve or to boost the incentives in terms of funding out there for training, in aviation maintenance.
Damon, is there more foreign investment for the capitalization of what you do?
Yeah, and I think this is something that we see ebb and flow over the years. I've been in the industry for about 25 years, and when I first started, European money center banks were very heavily invested in commercial aircraft. Ironically, large corporations like the Disney Corporation or Whirlpool were also heavily invested in aircraft. And as you go through time, obviously there's cycles in this industry. There's highs and lows. It's the one constant to the industry. And every couple of years, you'll go through a low, and the banks that seem to be attracted to capital at that time, by and large, pull out. And that creates an opportunity. So then what happens? Another area, another geographical area, another set of banks will jump in. And so we've seen, the Japanese have kind of come in and out of the industry. The Europeans have come in and out of the industry today. Chinese banks are very heavily invested in the industry. U.S. banks seem to be a constant, but in a very small way, relative to the overall industry. They've certainly been players, but more often than not, the capital is coming from overseas.
In the movie Wall Street in 1984, Gecko says, airlines are a lousy investment, lousy unions. I mean, that was a motion picture, but do the union cost scare off investors?
No, look, I think if you go back in time, a lot of people would say that airlines are lousy investments because up into the last maybe 6 or 7 years, cumulatively, the industry has lost money, right? We only turned that corner probably 6 or 7 years ago where the industry is net positive. So, thinking back into, I guess, the 90s, in the time of that movie, airlines were really bad investments. And relative, I would have to say that today even airlines are not the greatest investments, right, because of the cyclicality. But I think if you understand the cyclicality, whether you're someone like us that provides capital in the industry or you're an ordinary investor, maybe where you're putting some of your 401k or your retirement in, as long as you understand the cyclical nature, I think you could do just great.
Sherry, you want to add to that?
I would say, except for Southwest Airlines, that's always been profitable. So I think it's worth noting that that's always been a profitable airline.
Yeah, I'm talking industry. You're right. You're right. But industry as a whole.
I just want to give them a shout out for that because it's a difficult thing to do in an airline industry.
How many came into their jobs in the post 9/11 era? You didn't come out. Were you at the FAA at that time?
I was at the FAA during 9/11.
Okay. What were you doing at
I
that
was
time?
already in the industry. I worked for Spirit Airlines, you know.
You worked for Spirit Airlines?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Damon, where were you?
I was working for a finance company in New York called CIT.
Okay. Stephen,
Yep, still airlines, yep.
did any of you feel at any time immediately after the tragedy of 9/11 that the airline industry was going to stop for a while just because of the uncertainty? We had a war concern, but also people were shattered. The country was in a very deep concern. Did you think that it was going to take the airline industry out of profitability? Any of you?
I think I'd speak for myself just in that, I remember in that moment, I knew that the airline business would never be the same as it was before 9/11. It would be very different business. And what I mean by that is if you think about the things that have changed since 9/11, they did, you know, the whole consolidation side of the business happened after post 9/11. Did that expedite it? Probably. Bankruptcies that people wouldn't have expected in the airline. So it's extremely disruptive event. And I think dependent upon, if you think about how margins in the airline were so thin as it was, the idea of an event like that, when you ground airplanes, all airplanes, and when the public loses their trust in flying in general, not just in the airlines, I think there was a drastic downturn. And then couple that with the economic situation that occurred post 9/11 as far as people's ability to have extra money to go on vacation and buy those tickets to go and fly. Is that what led to 2006 through 2008 sort of bankruptcy kind of efforts? I think it immediately changed that. That's just from the economic side. I think it drastically changed the way we flew airplanes. I mean, we had a new threat, again, a new threat. And that threat was not the person who was going to hijack an airplane. I think one of the things I'll never forget is that I flew the very first flight into Washington National after 9/11. And the very first flight, and if any of you are Stephen King fans, there's a great book that he wrote called The Langoliers. And I have never, landing at DCA and getting out at Ronald Reagan International Airport, and you could hear the birds tweeting because there's not another sound at Reagan National Airport. That makes you start to think that something is very, very different about this situation than any other time in history. And so I think that what we learned there was that there was a new threat to commercial aviation that we never had thought of before.
This is a question that you were all asked, except for Damon, earlier in the day. Did you pick your career that you're in, or did the career pick you? And I'll ask, beginning with Sherry.
I sort of picked the career I'm in. So I started because I wanted to be a pilot, and I decided to go a different route with that. And I went to law school after going to Riddle. Ultimately, I knew I wanted to be back into aviation in a legal role. So, I think that I've picked my role. As long as I'm dealing with airplanes, I'm pretty happy.
Okay. You said earlier you got to live near an airport.
I do. I do have to live near an airport.
It would drive you crazy if you didn't?
It would, mostly because I travel extensively, regularly, so it makes my life easier as well. But I need to be around planes and people who talk about planes. And
Before I go to Damon, when you were a student here, did you envision you would be in a career that would have you in the air as much as it does?
Of course I did. I wouldn't come here if I didn't think that would be the case.
Well, reality, what you do now.
I actually thought that this would be, that I would exactly have the opportunities that I had. Whether those were lofty goals, they came to fruition. So I feel pretty good about sort of the end game that came about. I had to take a couple detours and maybe some jobs that weren't exactly aviation related, but I wound up back where I wanted to be.
how cool is that you get to live your dream? You went to school and you had this idea, you came to the university that this is what you wanted to take from the university and make a contribution to society. Damon, when you were here, did you think that you would be doing what you're doing now? And did the career pick you, or you picked the career?
Yeah, so when I was a student here, I mean, aircraft leasing, we talked earlier, we said that roughly 50% or half of the commercial aircraft are leased. When I was a student here, that industry was really in its infancy. I think, probably somewhere on the order of maybe 10% would probably be generous, but certainly, kind of like mid-single digits. And it wasn't really talked about much. So did I think I was going to be in aircraft leasing? No. Did I think I was going to be in aviation business? Absolutely. It's why I came to Embry-Riddle. It was what I wanted to do. It was my passion. And so I was very fortunate when I left. I joined a company that was run by ex-Embry-Riddle alum as well. And that's sort of how I got into the industry. It was by happenstance. And I would say in my senior year, I did write a paper on aircraft leasing, which I came across about 2 years ago. And I can't believe how much I got wrong. But it's been fun.
Steven, same thing.
I think, since I kind of had two careers, one in aviation, one in medicine now, I think the aviation definitely I chose. I chose that from a very early age. I told the group today, my dad was in the Navy, and I was always around Navy aircraft, so I just wanted to be a Blue Angel. That was my goal. That's what I wanted to do. And so when I got my wings, in flight school in the Navy, my dad gave me a picture. And it was a picture of me as maybe a 7 or 8 year old. I've fallen asleep at the wheel of an F4 Blue Angel at an air show, and so it was kind of my first. I guess I just kind of wanted to hug it, that jet. I didn't want to be away from it. So I always wanted to be that. I think in the medicine side, it was really all the work that I'd been taught, or the things that I'd learned through aviation that sort of kind of pulled me into medicine more than me picking it. It picked me.
Okay, Ed, same question.
Yeah, so I grew up as a kid. I had a great interest in aerospace engineering. So, growing up in Nigeria, I didn't have an opportunity to attend a university that offered a 4-year a degree in aerospace engineering. But also,
But tell them how you found Embry-Riddle. Reading.
Yeah, so I had the privilege of having a dad who had a strong, rich collection of books, magazines. So every Reader's Digest out there, he had a collection. So one day I was rummaging through, his books, and I ran into a Reader's Digest, and there was an article about Embry-Riddle, So I said, well, if Embry-Riddle is the oldest aeronautical university out there, I will certainly someday aspire to get there. And of course, I pursued that dream and ended up in a situation where I had the opportunity to attend Embry-Riddle. But of course, going back to your question, I always wanted to be a pilot. So I wanted to be a pilot, I wanted to be an engineer. But at that time, growing up in Nigeria, the only access I had to aviation was an aviation maintenance school. So I took a 2-year degree program in aviation maintenance. After coming down to the United States after my 2 years of education there, I realized that I could get my A&P. So I got my A&P and continued my education. Had the opportunity of studying aerospace engineering, and also had the opportunity of getting my pilot certificate. So all in all, I think I've been very fortunate to experience, the engineering side, the flying side, and of course the maintenance side of things in aviation.
If I could share as a moderator, one of the things that's a takeaway from this Lift magazine story is the relationships that are made as a result of the educational experience here and the people you meet in the industry. Sherry, you were saying a lot of your opportunities came as a result of the people you met, and I think you said, I have to remember, some things are off the record, some things are on the record. You saw an accident when you were young?
I did. I used to go to like, the local FBO and eat in the restaurants above the runways, and I saw an accident. And I can remember at the time, I think it was my stepfather was with me, and he thought, oh, well, she's not going to go to Riddle now. And I was obsessed with that accident. I wanted to know why it happened. It didn't scare me. I wasn't worried about the industry at all. I really had just such an incredible fascination with it. And I know I speak among people who are similar to me in that accident investigation was such a passion, and safety was such a passion, and it just developed from that point on.
We did a program here 6 years ago from the author of the book, and he's now a CNN analyst, Why Planes Crash. I don't know if any of you have ever seen that book. That took the breath right out of me when I read that, about the things that we don't know, the seen and unseen. I want to give an opportunity. I know this audience has been watching all of this, but I want you all to have an opportunity to ask a couple of questions in the time that we remain. I see students here. Would you come up to the microphone and ask your question? Give us your first name, your year of study. I can take one here and one here. And we'll begin with you tonight. Thank you for being with us at our event.
I appreciate you guys having me. My name's Miles Nathan. I'm a Master of Science in Aviation Finance student here at Riddle, and this is my first year. This question is mostly directed at Damon, but I'm interested to hear anyone's perspective if they have one. You mentioned there's something like 150 leasing companies currently operating today, and I was just wondering what a newer leasing company like yourself does to differentiate yourself from the other companies, and how you sort of gain your market share and get customers while still being able to make a profit.
Yeah, thanks, Miles. I think, I talked earlier about creativity, and in that I talked about relationships. But what I didn't talk about is, even though we're a new company, in terms of age of the corporation, my colleagues, and some of them actually are Embry-Riddle graduates as well, as part of the story, we all came together with decades of experience in the industry, and with that comes decades of relationships. And I don't want to like kind of underemphasize that, because it is so important with that many leasing companies, again, in our field, that are out chasing the business, and the finite number of airlines. People only have so many hours in their day at an airline, and so if they were to see everybody that wanted to see them, they would never get any work done. So I think having those relationships, having experience, worked with those airlines, and frankly speaking, because we came together from another company that was well regarded in the industry, we came in with a good pedigree, and I think that's helped immensely. So that's what I would say is kind of the way that I wouldn't think of us as a brand new company from that regard. In terms of building market share, I think the important thing there is to have the capital behind you so that you can actually grow. And so it's one thing to have the relationships, but you have to be meaningful to the customer as well. And so we're very fortunate that we've got shareholders who have well capitalized the business, and they've encouraged us and given us the tools that we need to go out and grow and provide something that's meaningful for the airlines.
Thank you for your question. Over here, Scott.
My name's Scott. I'm curious, I thought it was a part of all airline design that there's redundancy, and apparently there wasn't redundancy in the 737 MAX. There was just the one sensor. I want to know if any of you were surprised by that. And secondarily, if outside the United States, airline customers indicate a preference not to fly on the MAX after we go through the investigation process, and maybe they lose confidence.
Hold on, this gets long, so I want to break it up. The first part of your question, please, so they can have a chance at both ends.
I thought redundancy was a part of airplane design, and apparently there wasn't redundancy here. Are you surprised by that?
Were you surprised by the redundancy? Lack of redundancy.
Well, the way the system works is, again, you have to realize that before this particular system kicks in, from what I understand about it, we have something similar to this called a stick pusher on a 777. So generally, there's other things going on prior to system engagement. Again, around the sensor issue, I think you're correct that Boeing has been great about building, redundancies. The systems have backups of backups, right? So again, why? That's a good question that you ask about in this case, the AOA sensor, right? So the idea of understanding the angle of attack and whether one sensor or two sensors. Again, I'm not as equipped to discuss the particular technology. Again, I would agree with you that redundancy is built into these airplanes. How this particular system either has that or doesn't have that, I wouldn't be able to comment on. But I can tell you this: I would say that there's likely other there are other systems that are trying to work in conjunction with this system before this system actually interprets an issue or an anomaly.
Question over here, and we have an open mic over here. Go right ahead. Your name, and thank you for being with us.
Good evening. My name is Michael Steinek.
If you could speak up just a bit.
Yeah. I'll try again. Is it good now?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So I was saying good evening. My name is Michael Steinek. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time. And I am in the Masters of Business Administration in the final year here at the College of Business. I just wanted to know specifically, given that you are all Embry-Riddle graduates, how was your degree useful to the start of your career, and what is it bringing to you still today?
How was your degree applied to your business, into your field of work, and how is it continuing to pay that dividend to you today? Anybody jump in?
So I'll go for it. Michael, I think it's a good question that you asked, because everybody out there wants that assurance that, when I'm done with this degree program from Embry-Riddle, that it's going to create a difference out there. And I can assure you that it does. First of all, Embry-Riddle being the oldest aeronautical university out there, there is an assurance that there is accumulated knowledge that allows Embry-Riddle to continue to deliver quality education year on year. The people who are doing the hiring out there in the industry, majority of them are graduates from Embry-Riddle. So they understand the quality of education that comes from you studying it at Embry-Riddle. So when you go out there with a degree from Embry-Riddle, you're going out there with the assurance that you have the best education that can be obtained from a university that's solely committed to aviation. Aviation is the core area of competency for Embry-Riddle. It's not like the regular university out there that has many faculties, different subject areas. Embry-Riddle focuses solely on aviation. So it has the niche advantage in that whatever you study at Embry-Riddle, you can have the assurance that you can go out there and compete with the best and still be very, very successful.
Hey, good luck to you. Thank you for coming. Over here, your question, your name, and your field of study.
My name is Makai. I'm an unmanned air systems major and a human factors minor. In light of the 737 events that are happening, I was wondering if you think that the rapid integration of autonomy into the aviation industry is too quick. And I'm wondering if you think the training that the pilots are receiving with this autonomy may not be enough, or if they need more training specifically with the use of the autonomy.
I'll take that one. I think the answer to your question is absolutely more training, right? More cowbell. This is no doubt training is really important. I think that as a pilot, flying I'll just give my experience of, we're getting farther and farther as pilots away from the actual hand flying of the aircraft. In general, on a long haul a long haul mission, say if I fly from Atlanta to Johannesburg, 16-hour flight, right, nonstop. We may actually fly the airplane on average about 5 minutes out of that. 2 minutes for takeoff about 3 minutes off the autopilot for landing. So, and then if you get into weather, where the weather's really bad at destination, you may even auto land. So you don't fly it at all for landing. So you let the machine fly it. So the pilots are getting farther and farther away from some of their basic skill level. And then I think when you go with the technology, the autonomy is, you absolutely have to know the modes that the technology, when the technology takes over, and when the pilot's in control, when the technology's in control. And you have to understand all of those situations that at hand. And I think that's going to become more and more important as we continue to have systems that automate the flight profile. And so I think it was the same when we went to adding technologies. We went from sort of the round dials to the glass cockpits. We saw this move about getting pilots used to using and trusting the automation. Now we may be potentially over-trusting the technology. And so in that, though, I would say this, and we see this on the medical side as well, is that we need to be thinking from a human factor standpoint, and hopefully you all are in some of your programs, that you think of technology as another team member, another crew member, and start to think more like, how can it help me? And if it shows up on a bad day and it doesn't act right or doesn't do what it's supposed to do, how can I manually override that and take over for that crew member that maybe not at its best today? So thinking of technology as a member of the team may be the way we're going to be able to do this better and work together, human and machine, in the future. That's my kind of take on it. But I think we need to get a little more hand flying. Those kinds of things and those are some of the things we're all trying to do more of, and to be more in tune with the aircraft.
Precious minutes, your question.
Hi, my name is Edwin Forster. I'm a sophomore in the O'Malley College of Business. I'm a finance major. As a finance major, I think a lot about the rise of automation and AI, kind of echoing off the last question, and how it's going to completely revolutionize the industry at basically every level. So my question for the speakers is how each of your industries or companies are trying to get out ahead of the massive change we're going to experience, especially in regards to increasing profits, and how this might...
If you could be right into the mic, because we can't hear you, I'm sorry, with the rain.
My question for the speakers was, how are each of your industries or companies trying to get ahead of the massive change we're going to be experiencing, especially in regards to increasing profits, and how this might shift the demand for the shortage of qualified professionals we are currently experiencing?
I could only hear part of it. Did any of you pick that up?
I thought you said with increasing technology, how that affects each of us individually.
I mean, with the rise of AI and automation, and if you think of how far we've come in the past 50 years, I have a 50-year career ahead of me, how far AI and automation are going to completely change every experience, from flying to customer experience to every part of the industry. How are kind of each of your industries or companies trying to get ahead of that? And
Okay.
How AI? Go
Sure,
right
I can
ahead.
answer some of it in two different areas. For me, insuring is not going to change much. The litigation will still be there. If hopefully there'd be less of it or not, but it certainly would be the same type of litigation. It's all products liability litigation that I would see in what I do. And in terms of actually insuring, again, when I spoke about drones, that's a new area for insurers to think about, and I would say that what I do touches every single person here. Every person here has to be insured. I insure his hull, I insure his, not him personally, I'm just saying, I insure his aircraft so that he maintains whatever investment he's made in that. In terms of Delta pilot, we certainly insure the actions that he takes when he's flying an aircraft. Same when my friend here is doing an excellent job doing maintenance on an aircraft. It's all part of the insured contract. The same as 9/11. I kind of wanted to segue into that a tiny bit. I think insurers would hit the hardest by 9/11 because it was an insured event. So no one could have anticipated the incredible number that was associated with that litigation that's still ongoing, by the way. So how does it impact us? I think it creates other opportunities for us to find business. I would hope so. everything is an opportunity.
I have a question. Speaking of artificial intelligence, very briefly, do you envision that as artificial intelligence expands, it will become almost an equal with humans working on aircraft in the coming generation?
I think I'll respond to that question by saying that, every company out there aims to differentiate itself by creating value, right? So you look at it from the standpoint of value in the aviation maintenance industry. The airline wants to bring an aircraft to the hangar, and they also want an assurance that that aircraft will be completed within a defined period of time. They also want an assurance that the cost of that maintenance is not going to exceed defined budgets. They also want to make sure that that aircraft can be counted upon to perform at the highest level of reliability. So when you put all those factors in together, there's definitely an opportunity to leverage technology, automation, or similar applications to increase the efficiency of the mechanic while he or she is performing maintenance. The time he or she spends, trying to get whether it's tools or materials or other support items needed to complete the job, if that time can be mitigated so that there's more touch time committed to performing maintenance. If the engineer can have all the history pertaining to similar repairs that have been done on that aircraft, so that when it comes time to research a repair scheme on a discrepancy on an aircraft, you have information that is provided to you at your fingertips instead of you having to do all the research to figure out what repair will be appropriate for a damage on the aircraft. If the quality control inspector can also be informed of what jobs is he or she seeing an uptick in escapes. All that can be leveraged to allow the maintenance industry to be more efficient in ensuring that when Delta Airlines or United Airlines or American Airlines or any other airline partners we have out there delivers an aircraft to us at our facility, they can have the assurance that that aircraft is going to be completed within the defined check span, because if that doesn't happen, then it impacts future flight operations. If the aircraft is supposed to be completed today and for some reason it's not, then the airline has to change its plans because other airplanes downstream will be compromised. So I think for me that automation and technology is certainly something that would positively impact what we do.
Damon, and then we'll take our last question.
Yeah, so I think we're hearing a little bit of a theme, right? And from the students, they're thinking, hey, is automation going to make me obsolete when I'm your age and I'm sitting on this stage? And I would say, let's go back in time. Robotics. There's technology. There's a lot of things that have come in the last 40 or 50 years. But yet, look out at the workforce today. We've got the lowest unemployment we've had in probably 50 years right now, or very close to record low unemployment. It's not because there's less in the labor force. It's just because the labor force has shifted. Over time, people have gotten smarter and they've realized, hey, instead of this, I'm going to do that. And so I wouldn't be worried. If that's kind of the premise of the questions, I wouldn't be worried. I think you've just got to stay ahead of it.
Okay, let me come over here because this man looks big enough. I'm not going to say no. Go ahead.
My name is Christian Wood, sophomore, pursuing a Bachelor of Science in the Aviation Maintenance Management. My question is to you, Edward. So we've already spoken about the upcoming mechanics shortage. But could you speak to, in your experience, what you foresee for an up-and-coming experienced A&P mechanic, where the most lucrative opportunities would be for them? Is it going to be in large commercial operations? Is it going to be in business and corporate aviation? Or is it going to be in highly specialized fields related to like space planes and other perhaps supersonic aircraft? Where do you foresee in the coming future where the experienced A&P mechanics will have the most lucrative opportunities?
So, Christopher, that's an excellent question. Of course, those questions were running through my mind as I was preparing to engage my career journey. But I want to leave you with a few points. First of all, I think that you should pursue your career with a mindset of openness, right? And your focus should be whatever I do or whatever opportunities are given to me, I want to excel at it. I want to differentiate myself from everyone else who's doing that. And I can assure you I've had the opportunity to work in many areas of the aviation maintenance industry. I've worked in quality control, I've worked in quality assurance, I've worked in continuous improvement, I've worked in systems engineering, I've worked in, I've done some, liaison engineering work as well, because I oversaw a team of engineers. In every aspect of my career, my ability to differentiate myself or to make myself valuable to my employer was the key ingredient, that allowed me to make significant progress. So, with the little exposure you have to the industry, I just want you to approach your career with a lot of enthusiasm, with an open mind. Just excel at whatever you do, and just allow your excellence to drive your destination.
Here's a quote. What if everything you did up to that time was preparing you for what you would be doing now? The person who said it, Stephen Powell, earlier today. Your final question now tonight.
Thanks for letting me get my question in. My name is Ryan Kirby. Good evening. And I'm in my first year of aviation business at the College of Business. And my question is, it's a common fact that fossil fuels are going to run out in the near future. There's predictions of 50, 80 to 100 years. So this leads me into the question of, do you not believe there should be more investments in the development of engines and aircrafts that can use renewable resources in working?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a great question.
There's so many reasons why, right? I mean, there's an economic reason that airplanes like the 787 exist, right? That some of the new Airbus, I mean, you could speak more to this, Edward, about the efficiency of these engines at this point, and the ability to go farther, faster, longer. All of those things are market differentiators. And so again, thinking about ways that you can, it's kind of always the win-win. Always think sort of like with your career advice, I think is always in solutions. I think it goes a lot to what Damon's saying. For the customer, is always trying to find win-win-win type of setup. So as you look to the future and look for ways to, as we all look for ways to probably reduce our carbon footprint, right? And thinking about how we do that and what will drive us there is what kind of wins can we produce from that? Is it going to make our airplanes faster? Is it going to make us be able to travel farther to meet a market need that's out there? Will it again allow us to go places we haven't gone before? Things like that. And what we're seeing now, I think will drive a lot. It could be, you may be facing. It's really great. To see, we were talking, I think, briefly at lunch about the 50th anniversary of the moonwalk is coming up, and you all live in the space environment here. And the idea is, are we in the midst or beginning another period of time that's going to be like the space, our time when I was a youth, and thinking about what that might bring to us, because so many of our innovations that we've had over the last 30, 40 years came a lot from that effort. And so efforts like that around carbon emission, things of that nature, will it drive us towards a new frontier? I think it will. And I think we just have to figure out to make the business case for it.
I want to thank the combined talents of Alan Caesar, Sarah Withgrow, Tony Brown, Bill Thompson, and all the people that worked behind the scenes to put this together. An incredible panel: Edward Onwe, Sherry Ortiz, Damon D'Agostino, and Stephen Powell. Thank you all for being here tonight. I appreciate it. And to all of you, I just want to tell you, our final event in the Embry-Riddle Speaker Series for this year will actually be next Monday night following the Veterans Appreciation Day ceremonies. We'll talk with Major General Alfred K. Flowers, retired United States Air Force, the longest-serving airman in U.S. Air Force history and the longest-serving African-American service member within the Department of Defense. He will be our guest next Monday night, free and open to the public. Immediately following this program, don't leave because we have, I think, we have a gift for one lucky member of the audience tonight, I think.
Yes.
I can't hear you because I don't have the IFP. So anyway, thank you all for coming tonight. Please be careful, raining tonight, but we'll see you in a week right here in the Embry-Riddle Speaker Series.